The unit plan that I will be presenting today is on the 1920s, or more commonly known as the Roaring Twenties. Students will be diving into the world of the 1920s where they will come face to face with the culture, the music, the people, and the technology, and seeing how all those things transformed this decade into one of the most successful in American history. Lesson 1 is an overview of the 1920s where students will learn about the basic themes and culture of the 1920s. For this lesson, students will use technologies such as Notability for note-taking, build a haiku deck, interact with Zaption and Google Forms. The learning style that stands out during this lesson is the interpersonal learning style, appealing to students that work better by themselves than with groups. Lesson 2 is where students will learn about urbanization and the impact that it had on the 1920s as cities became larger and rural areas are in decline. This lesson is veered towards the intrapersonal learner, allowing them to use technology such as the Guru Learning app to work independently on assignments. Lesson 3 will introduce students to the importance of women's suffrage and how women work together to have rights such as voting. Students will scan QR codes to access websites, to watch videos, and read an article on the topic to increase their knowledge of the importance. Lesson 4 will put an emphasis on the fact that the 1920s was a technology-driven era. Many great inventions became a reality during this time. Students will use the RWT timeline to organize the events chronologically and see their place in history. Many students who are naturalists or logical will benefit from this type of learning activity. Lesson 5 will touch on how the radio was a life-changing invention when it entered American culture. It was not only used for news, but for entertainment as well. Students will use an iPad to do the round table strategy using the Pencil 53 app, which will allow for students to write down answers in a timely fashion. This is an excellent activity for interpersonal and kinesthetic learners who like to be with others and have the need to move around. Lessons 6 and 7 will focus on the topic of radio and film in the 1920s. Students will use a variety of apps over the course of these 2 lessons, as well as capture the essence of radio and film by creating a Canovia as one of their major projects in the unit. These lessons will cater to the learning styles such as intrapersonal, naturalist, interpersonal, and visual, appealing to multiple learners, not just one. Lesson 8 will explore the world of commercials and marketing in the 1920s. Students will use YouTube to watch multiple advertisements from the time era and have the opportunity to make their own commercial with Dropbox to record their voice and the commercial they constructed. This lesson was especially created for the verbal learners in the classroom. Lesson 9 will go more in depth into the culture and lifestyle of the 1920s, where students will learn how Americans lived during this decade. As a class, students will explore a Nearpod lesson about the culture of the 1920s, which will include videos, polls, multiple choice questions, short answers, and a variety of readings to help students better grasp the 1920s era. This will appeal to the intrapersonal learners who prefer to work independently on assignments and at their own pace. Lesson 10 focuses on the fashion in the 1920s and how it molded the culture and the appearance of women over the course of the decade. Students will have the opportunity to find their own image of a person in the 1920s attire to analyze using the Explain It All app. They will then present their opinions and findings to their fellow classmates in small groups. This type of lesson will appeal to the visual students due to the use of pictures and the opportunity to visually see the fashion of that day. Lesson 11 will take students into the world of The Great Gatsby, where they will see the glamorous side of the 1920s where people danced, partied, and lived life in a carefree way. Students will watch clips of The Great Gatsby, and as a major project in this unit, they will create a comic strip on the Comic Life app, using their iPads to create how they see people in the 1920s. Lessons 12 through 15 will cover the multiple aspects of the Harlem Renaissance and the effect that it had on music, culture, writers, and art. These lessons are designed to get students to critically think about the culture of the 1920s and how it may have affected our American culture today. Students will use tools like MindMeister and Google Earth to complete tasks throughout these lessons. For their major projects, they will use Doodle app to create a poster of a person who contributed to the Harlem Renaissance using Google Images and creativity to communicate that person's role during that time. Students will also create a jazz song using GarageBand with their own twist and originality. The learning styles that will be primarily addressed during these lessons will be musical, naturalist, visual, and interpersonal.
I've grown so lonesome thinking of you.